A 2-hour workshop pushed down to 15 minutes. And so it's obvious that I can't do that. So I'm going to just take a piece of it and introduce this concept to you. We all know the elevator speech and the idea of conversational branding. But really, what we don't know is thinking deep behind it. How do you come up with such a thing? How do you come up with your elevator speech? What's it all about? I've been interested for years in the minutia of human behavior and how we, the little things that we do to create relationships. For example, when you go into an elevator, you know, one person goes in the elevator, and there are 2 people in there, you split it in 2, and 3 people, you split it in thirds and fours, etc. So all of that behavior is really well defined. Well, there's an aspect of meeting somebody at a social situation that actually can be defined and can be looked at objectively, almost scientifically, and picked apart in a way that you don't think of typically at all. And we began to do this with our clients because we're creating brands, branding materials, brochures, all that, the kind of tactics and tools that lawyers will use. And the result is, once we get it to them and it's in their hands, they don't know what to do with it. So they wind up in boxes, or they wind up not being used, or if they're used, they're pushed across the table hesitantly, they're used ineffectively. Well, here's a moment that we can actually start to behave effectively, and all lawyers can learn this. So we go into the situation, and what happens, this is almost unique to America. I've traveled all over, and rarely does somebody come up to you and say, what do you do? That's really rude in most countries, but in the United States, that's what we do. You don't know somebody, you're trying to figure out who they are, and so you say, what do you do? Well, lawyers typically say their answer is, I'm a lawyer, and it's usually followed by an apology. And if you live in Washington, where 1 out of 15 people are lawyers, it's almost inevitably followed by some kind of joke about lawyers. Okay. This is a bad place to start. This is starting from a hole. We really need to start from a better point of view. So what we decided to do was to break apart the moment and say, okay, we talk about having branding goals. We talk about having sales goals. What's the goal of this particular moment? Can we actually define the goal? Well, we look at this moment and we say, first of all, when somebody says, what do you do? And your answer is, I'm a this, I'm a that, I'm a whatever. I failed to do something. I failed to answer, who am I? I failed to answer, who do I work with or for? And I failed to answer, well, how do I do what I do? So I've not really given this person any help whatsoever. But what, in fact, do you want to know, who asked the question, hey, what do you do? I want to know 3 things. I want to know, who are you? And I don't just mean your name. I want to know, who are you? I want to know, because it would really be a great way to start a relationship, wouldn't it? How can I help you? And then, really, if I can find a way to help you, then I'd like to know how you can help me. So think about that. Those are goals that we could set up literally in response to that completely innocuous question, hi, what do you do? So there's a feature of these kind of conversations that we have when I'm sure you've been to these situations where people are talking endlessly about themselves, and you think, okay, not interested. So one of the things that we need to understand is if you're not interested in me, I'm not interested in you. So let's figure out a way to make this a conversation, a dialogue, because my goal is really to create a friend. So first thing, have a purpose. What do you want to happen in this conversation? Second, let's create a dialogue. This is not rocket science, but let's figure this out. Let's create a dialogue. And then third, position yourself as important, confident, and a leader. I do not well, let me back up and say, all of the work that comes out of our shop wants to answer a couple of questions. One is, quick 3 seconds, what's your takeaway? But the other most important thing is, does this piece position your firm as important, confident, and a leader? And why shouldn't it? That's, after all, everything that you want, isn't it? You want to be perceived as, certainly as an individual, as important. You want to be perceived as confident. You want to be perceived, as we've talked about earlier, we want to be perceived as a leader. I can't imagine somebody wants to be perceived as unimportant, Mr. Cellophane, as lacking in confidence and worthless in the conversation and not a leader, right? So your goal is, you're somewhere between that continuum, that long continuum. How do you get over there to the 10, to being that positive purpose? So have a purpose. All right. Conversations launched with a purpose, and I know I hardly need to go through this, but just go through it quickly. Can convince people to buy your products, persuade them to use your services, inspire you to raise their flag, contribute to their causes, or join their mission. There's a lot of things that you can do if you do this correctly. And those that are great leaders, great what we call salespeople, aren't necessarily doing this because they're doing it naturally. You can learn this. This is not something that's impossible. So your purpose is to make a business friend. Go back to Aristotle, relationships. He said several types of relationships. One of the most important relationships is a relationship among business friends. So create a dialogue. Here's the features of a dialogue. First thing the 30-second pitch technique does is it tells a story. We learn about each other from storytelling. That's how we get to know one another. It does not recite a resume. Oh, please, can you imagine? And yet some of us are constantly trying to get those little resume bumps into that dialogue. What I believe it's really a choreographed mating dance. And this we go back to Aldous Huxley, one of the very first scientists who talked about I love it, the mating behavior of the great crested grebe. And it was the first one to observe that kind of really formal mating behavior. This is a choreographed mating dance. We just don't know it. So we should pay attention to the choreography and learn the steps. And if you do that, you'll find yourself much more successful in it. Now, it certainly is ideally enthusiastic. However, you really can't teach enthusiasm. You either are or you're not. If you're not, fine. That's who you are. But it can be in your voice and in your inflection. And it is certainly in your smile, since we know that almost 90% of what we communicate is through our body language, and it's not in the words that we say. Witness the terrible communication that is email. So, all right. What we'll suggest, give you some examples. Here's the way to start. Invert the usual order of the answer. Consider, like Socrates, starting with a question. So here's some examples that you could use. All right. Hi, what do you do? So rather than saying, I'm a lawyer, one possible answer is to say, well, you know how companies use slogans like, if you've got the time, we've got the beer? Well, my law firm protects against others using those slogans improperly or stealing them outright. I'm the head of the firm's IP practice at the New York office. Okay, so we've just unpacked this. We started to tell an engaging story. I can relate to that, right? Comes right off the headlines, right off my personal experience. Then I can say, this is what I'm doing technically. This is my area of expertise. And this is who I am. And not only that, it's not about me. It's about me and my firm. It's bigger than me. Here's another one. Hey, what do you do? Well, do you commute from Virginia? Well, my firm made it possible for you to save 20 minutes off your morning drive time by helping make it possible to widen the Wilson Bridge. My firm is X, and I work in our Washington office. Now, obviously, these examples that are up here are a little stiff. You've got to make them your own, but you can make them your own based on the format that's here. So notice one important shift. It's a shift from me to we. So it's not about me. I eliminate the I from the answer, and I'm talking about what we do. I'm engaging the firm-wide brand. If you look at biggest change happened over the past 30 years in law firm branding is that my business card no longer has my name in giant letters and the name of the firm in tiny little letters. It's the name of the firm and my name appropriately sized like a corporate business card, right? That's a shift from me to we. Same shift needs to occur in this tiny moment. All right, include your firm name in the answer and widen the net. Okay, what do you do? Well, let's see. Did you realize that credit, this is going to be, I don't want to have this guy's job, but try it. Did you realize that credit card companies sell their income stream as securities? I'm one of 40 lawyers at firm in city that puts these kinds of deals together. In fact, We just created a security for the future earnings of old Hollywood films in Europe. You know how the French love Jerry Lewis. So there's a piece of this kind of silly introduction here, the overly long introduction, that's important to understand, in that I'm doing something more than just answering the question, what's that? I'm setting up the next component of the conversation. That's what's important. I'll talk about this in a second. So if you can be funny, bring it on. When I say boo, the stock market jumps. Nah, I'm kidding. Our firm spends a lot of time buying and selling large companies, and I'm right in the thick of it with 20 others in our group. I'm a partner with a capital markets group of X. So I like this guy, right? Because people who can be funny are automatically confident, because if you're not, you're probably, maybe you're a little dull, but if maybe you're not so confident. But in any case, this is probably an engaging person. I want to know more about that individual just because he or she is engaging in what they've said. This is something that someone actually used before we started working with the firm. I'm a professional ballet dancer. I studied for 5 years at Juilliard before touring the former Soviet Union with the George Balanchine Company. Currently, I'm playing the role of Swan in Swan Lake. This is a guy who said that. Audience, naturally, the person's mouth drops. He says, well, actually, I work at the private equity group. But you believed me at first, didn't you? So you can do that. You can be outrageous in that 30 seconds. Go back to your goal. Hold that goal in mind. So you buy permission to continue the conversation in small chunks of time. I believe you buy conversational time, just like you would on a stock market. You buy conversational time. It's not really a 30-second speech. It's more like a 10 to 15-second speech. If that went well, you get another 30 seconds. If that goes well, 2 minutes, and then you're on. Then you're moving on, because that person wants to know more about us. But unfortunately, we don't think about the first moment, so we let that moment go. So one of the things that 15-second speech does is sets up and wants to set up the follow-up questions that occur. So you want to be prepared to have your answers to the follow-up questions. So I've just told someone that I'm in a private equity group, or I'm in mergers and acquisitions, and the person's savvy enough to know that that means I'm buying and selling businesses. And so they're going to ask, well, what kinds of companies do you buy and sell? And what's the typical response to that? Oh, gee, wait a minute. I forgot. I know we do a lot of this stuff. So people forget, and I must admit I forget. I do the same thing too. Unless I'm prepared, I'll forget what's new at my firm. What's the latest thing that I've done? So I want to have that at the ready. Or the Jerry Lewis films, or any of the other. Is that fun? Do you enjoy that? Is that great? Tell me about that. Have I heard any of the deals? What I've heard of any of the things that you've done? You'll frequently get that question, people trying to establish where you should be in the pecking order. So some other thoughts, just if you're perfecting this, you can be outrageous if you can pull it off. This was an actual 30-second pitch that some fellow at Goodwin Procter used, who actually does defend Philip Morris nationwide against all the claims they get for lung cancer. He pulled it off brilliantly and you didn't hate him at the end of that. He made a case for what he did in a very effective way, and I was stunned that that could be done. Focus on the value you bring to the table. My firm backstops employers so they stay on the right side of discrimination and other employment issues. You've probably been reading about some of the more spectacular troubles like Walmart recently. My job is to keep our clients out of the business pages. I'm an employment lawyer at X. So I keep companies squeaky clean. Stories. So we're starting to tell stories. We can have the I in there as long as I conclude with the we. I draft those year-end disclosure statements of the SEC so our clients can avoid the Enron nightmare. Now, can you imagine sorry, I'm not a lawyer, but a more boring task than to draft year-end disclosure statements for the SEC? This must be hideous, but yet this is a great way of telling that story, I think, in a friendly way. I chair the corporate practice at X. So ultimately, this is little more than an exercise in courtesy. In fact, I do believe that all effective marketing, all effective communications is about courtesy. Don't assume that people want to read your stuff. Don't assume that people are interested in you. Assume that you have a responsibility to try to create interest and to explain, to put your best foot forward. The way to put your best foot forward is to create a situation where you're being courteous to your listener and giving them a hook that they can then build on. Did I do it? Am I done? Good. Great. Thank you.